Send help. We're not going to make it. That was the last thing the command tent heard before the radio. Died 12 Navy SEALs bleeding out in a valley while an enemy commander laughed on the open channel, ordering his men to kill them slow, so everyone back home could listen. Air support was grounded. Reinforcements were impossible. Every officer in that room had already started writing the letters in their heads. And then a quiet woman, nobody had ever noticed, a contractor they dismissed as nothing, set down her cold coffee and said 6 words that would change everything. I can get them out. Alone. Before we go any further, do me a small favor. Subscribe to the channel and stay with this story all the way to the end, because what happens in the next 2 hours will stay with you. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from right now so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. Nobody in the command tent at Ridgepoint Forward Operating Base was looking at Ava Mercer, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She stood near the back canvas wall with a paper cup of cold coffee in her hands, and she watched. That was the thing about Ava. She watched. The radio on the center table crackled again, and the sound of it made every man in that tent flinch. Ridgepoint, this is Bravo. Actual, we are pinned. I say again, we are pinned, taking fire from 3 sides. The voice broke apart into static and gunfire, and then came back thinner. We got 2 down. We can't move. We can't move. Captain Ryan Cole slammed his hand flat on the table. Bravo, actual, hold position. We are working the problem. Do you copy, hold position? There was a long pause, too long. Copy, the voice said finally, and there was something in it now that hadn't been there a minute ago, something that had already started to let go. Holding. Cole straightened up and dragged a hand down his face. He was 44 years old and he had buried men before, and he knew that sound, that surrender in a young man's voice better than he wanted to. He looked around the tent at the faces staring back at him, and he saw the same thing he felt. There was no answer here. Every road on that map led to a funeral. Talk to me, Cole said. Somebody talk to me. What have we got? Lieutenant Daniel Shaw was already shaking his head. Air's grounded, sir. The weather cell is sitting right on top of the valley, and it's not moving for 6, maybe 8 hours. Nothing's flying, not a bird, not a drone, nothing. Then we drive. Sir, the only road in is the same road they used to insert. That's how the enemy knew where to set up. We roll a convoy down that road. We're not sending a rescue. We're sending more bodies for the same grave. Cole's jaw worked. He knew Shaw was right. He hated that Shaw was right. Master Sergeant Ray Coleman leaned over the map, a big man with gray in his stubble and 30 years in his eyes. He tapped the paper with one thick finger. It's a box, Captain. Look at it. They funneled our boys down into the low ground, and then they closed the sides. Whoever set this up knew our people would run for the tree line here. He tapped again. And they were waiting for it. This wasn't luck. This was patience. So what do we do? Coleman looked up, and for a moment the big man didn't have anything. That was the part that scared Cole the most. Coleman always had something. I don't know, sir, Coleman said quietly. I honestly don't. And that was when Ava Mercer set her coffee cup down on the folding table by the wall, and she said in a voice that wasn't loud at all, I can get them out. The tent went still. Every head turned, and then Lieutenant Shaw laughed, one short, ugly bark of a laugh, because the tension had to go somewhere, and it went there. I'm sorry, Shaw said. Who let the contractor in here? Ava didn't answer him. She was looking at the map. Ma'am, Coleman said not unkindly, this is an active operation. You need to step outside. You have 12 men in a valley, Ava said, still looking at the map. And you have about 40 minutes before that number starts going down and doesn't stop. I can get them out, but you're going to have to let me talk. Captain Cole studied her. He'd seen her around the FOB for 3 weeks now. Logistics contractor, the paperwork said. Something to do with equipment tracking. She kept to herself, ate alone, never raised her voice, never caused a problem. He'd honestly forgotten her name twice. Now she was standing in his command tent, telling him she could do what a Tier 1 quick reaction force couldn't, and every instinct he had told him to throw her out. But the radio crackled again, and this time there were no words at all. Just gunfire and a man's voice underneath it praying. Talk, Cole said. Captain, Shaw started. I said talk, Cole snapped. Fast. Aviva stepped up to the table. She didn't reach for the map. She just looked at it, and then she looked at the radio, and then she closed her eyes for a second, and Cole had the strange feeling she was listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. "Play the last transmission back," she said. "The gunfire. I want to hear the gunfire." Coleman glanced at Cole. Cole nodded. Coleman keyed the recorder and the sound filled the tent, again that awful stuttering roar, and the men flinched a second time, but Ava didn't flinch. She tilted her head. She listened the way a doctor listens to a chest. "There," she said. "Stop. You hear that?" "I hear my men dying," Shaw said. "You hear 2 heavy weapons," Ava said, and now her voice had changed. It was still quiet, but it had edges now and something underneath it that made Coleman straighten up without meaning to. "2 of them. Cyclic rates too steady for anything handheld. Those are belt-fed, emplaced, and they're not firing at the same time, they're taking turns. One suppresses while the other reloads. Then they swap. That's not a mob of insurgents spraying at shadows. That's fire discipline. That's training." The tent was very quiet now. "Keep going," Cole said. "Whoever's running this, put those 2 guns up high on opposite sides of the valley angled in." She lifted her hands and made an L with them slow so they could all see it. "Your men are here in the low ground. 1 gun covers this axis. The other covers this one. Anything that moves out of cover gets caught in the corner where the 2 fields of fire cross. That's the kill zone. That's why they can't run. Every direction they pick one of those guns already owns it." Coleman was staring at her now. "That's an L-shaped ambush," he said slowly. "That's a textbook L-shaped ambush," Ava said. "And I can tell you something else. Those guns are the whole thing. Take those 2 positions out and the whole trap comes apart. Everybody else out there is infantry. Riflemen, brave maybe, but ordinary. They're only dangerous because those 2 guns are pinning your men in place so they can be picked apart. Kill the guns and your SEALs stop being trapped and start being 12 of the most dangerous men on that mountain." For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then Shaw shook his head. "This is insane. Sir, with respect, this is insane. We are not going to build a rescue plan around a logistics clerk who thinks she can hear machine guns like they're a song." "She's right about the L," Coleman said. Shaw turned on him. "What?" "She's right, Dan." Coleman's voice was flat. "I've been staring at this map for 20 minutes, and she just told me the exact shape of it from listening to a recording. She's right about the guns taking turns. I heard it too, and I didn't put it together. She did, in about 6 seconds." Cole looked at Ava. "Say you're right. Say it's 2 emplaced guns and a crossfire. That still leaves the question of how. Because I can't get an aircraft in there, and I can't get a vehicle in there, and I can't get 1 more man into that valley without adding to the body count. So how exactly do you get 12 men out of a box that a QRF can't crack?" Ava met his eyes, and Cole would remember later that she didn't hesitate. "I go alone," she said, "on foot, overland, not on the road. I get above the valley on the high ground behind the eastern gun, and I take the guns out 1 at a time before they know I'm there. Once the guns are down, your team leader pushes his men out to the north tree line. I cover them the whole way. Anybody who tries to stop them, I put down." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than before, for it had been despair. Now it was disbelief, and underneath the disbelief in 1 or 2 faces, something that wasn't quite hope but was pointed in that direction. "You," Shaw said. "Oh, my no. 1 person, on foot, in this weather, behind enemy lines, against a coordinated ambush force. You're going to walk up there and just turn off the machine guns." "Yes," Ava said, with what I have." "Which is what a clipboard." Ava looked at him for a long moment, and something moved behind her eyes, and then it was gone. "Captain," she said, turning back to Cole, ignoring Shaw completely now. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to make a choice. You can wait for the weather to break, and when it does, you'll fly in, and you'll recover 12 bodies, and you'll write 12 letters. Or you can let me try. If I fail, you're no worse off than you are right now. You lose nothing, because right now, sir, you have nothing." Cole felt those words hit him somewhere deep because they were true, and the truth of them was the worst thing he'd heard all night. "Give us the room," Cole said. "Everybody but Coleman. Out." The junior officers filed out into the rain. Shaw went last, and he stopped at the tent flap and looked back at Ava with open contempt. "When this goes wrong," he said, "and it will, I want it on record that I called it." "It's on record," Ava said without looking at him. Shaw left. Cole waited until it was just the three of them. Then he leaned on the table and he looked at Ava Mercer, this quiet woman in a plain jacket who had appeared in his tent like a stranger stepping out of the dark, and he asked the only question that mattered. Who are you really? Because you're not logistics. Logistics doesn't hear a firefight and read the enemy's whole plan out of it. So who am I actually talking to? Ava was quiet for a moment. Does it matter? She said. It matters to me because I am about to make a decision that puts 12 of my men's lives in the hands of somebody I can't identify. And if I'm going to do that, I need one honest thing from you. Just one. Are you telling me you can actually do this? Not that you'd like to. Not that you think you can. Can you do it? Because if you tell me yes and you're lying, those men are already dead and you'll have just wasted the last chance they had. The tent was full of the sound of rain and the low static hiss of the radio. Ava looked at Captain Cole, and when she spoke, her voice was as steady as anything he had ever heard. I have done it before, she said, more times than I'll ever tell you, and I'm telling you yes. I can do this. I can get your men out, but every second you spend deciding is a second I'm not moving, and up there, seconds are the whole game. Coleman spoke up quietly. Sir, I've been doing this a long time, and I've met exactly two people in my whole career who talked the way she's talking right now. Both of them were the most dangerous human beings I ever stood next to, and both of them told the truth. Cole closed his eyes. He thought about the letters. 12 of them. He thought about knocking on 12 doors. He thought about the sound on the radio, that young man's voice already letting go. He opened his eyes. Do it, he said. God help me, do it. Ava was already moving. I need the frequency your team's on. The encrypted one, the real one, not the open channel the enemy's listening to. Coleman scribbled it on a card and handed it over. You want a comms plan? Call signs? My call sign is Overwatch. That's all they need to know. When they hear that word on the encrypted net, they'll know it's me and not the enemy, because the enemy doesn't have the encrypted net. She was checking a small pack now, one she'd apparently had ready by the wall the whole time, and Cole noticed that for the first time and felt a chill go through him. She'd come into this tent already packed. She'd known. How long to get in position, Cole asked. Overland in this weather, moving careful so I don't get seen 90 minutes. Maybe a little less. They don't have 90 minutes. They do if you keep them calm and keep them in cover and stop them from doing anything stupid. That's your job, Captain. Yours and the Master Sergeant's. You keep those boys still and quiet and alive for 90 minutes, and I'll do the rest. She slung the pack. Tell them exactly this. Tell them Overwatch is coming. Tell them do not break cover, do not try to run, do not do anything until they hear my voice on the encrypted net say the word clear. If they move before that, I can't protect them, and I can't promise anything. Can you make them understand that 12 scared men who think they're about to die? I'll make them understand, Cole said. Ava nodded. She turned toward the tent flap. Mercer, Cole said. Well, she stopped. If you pull this off, he said, I don't care what your file says or doesn't say. I'll stand in front of anybody who asks and tell them what you did. Ava looked back at him, and for just a second, something crossed her face that Cole couldn't name. It might have been gratitude. It might have been sadness. It might have been something older and heavier than either. Don't, she said softly. That's how people like me disappear, Captain, when people start telling the story. And then she pushed through the flap and walked out into the storm, and the canvas fell shut behind her, and she was gone. Coleman let out a long breath. Sir, he said, did we just do the right thing? I have no idea, Cole said. He was staring at the tent flap, still swaying from where she'd passed. I have absolutely no idea. Then he keyed the radio switch to the encrypted net and made himself sound like a man who believed every word he was about to say. Bravo Actual, this is Ridgepoint Actual on the secure channel. Do you copy? A crackle. Then the voice again. The SEAL team leader, and Cole knew from his file that this was Chief Petty Officer Jake Harlan, 13 years and a man who had been in worse spots than this and lived, though maybe not many. Ridgepoint Bravo. Actual, we copy secure. Go ahead and make it good, Ridgepoint, because I got men out here doing math on how many rounds they got left, and the math is bad. Cole gripped the edge of the table. Bravo Actual, listen to me carefully. Help is inbound, but it's not what you're expecting, and I need you to trust me. I need you to do exactly what I'm about to tell you, and I need you to make every man on your team do it too. Can you do that for me, Chief? A pause. Depends what it is, Ridge Point. You have an overwatch element coming. One shooter, moving to the high ground behind the enemy positions. Call sign Overwatch. When you hear that call sign on this channel, that's your friendly, that's your lifeline, and you do what they say. Until then, you hold. You do not break cover. You do not run. You wait for the word clear. You copy, a longer pause this time. Ridge Point, Harlan said slowly. Did you just say one shooter? Affirmative, one. You're sending me one person against what's got this pinned down out here. Cole looked at Coleman. Coleman looked back at him. And Cole made a decision about how much to say, and he decided to say all of it because a man about to bet his life deserved the truth. Chief, Cole said, I don't fully understand what I'm sending you. I can't tell you her name because I'm not sure I know it. I can't tell you her record because there isn't one I can find. What I can tell you is that she stood in my command tent and listened to your firefight for 6 seconds and told me the exact shape of the ambush you're sitting in down to the 2 machine guns and the L they've got you caught in. And I can tell you that a man I trust more than almost anyone alive looked me in the eye and told me she's the real thing. So no, Chief, I don't have a QRF for you, and I don't have air, and I don't have a convoy. What I have is her, and I am betting your lives on it because it's the only bet left on the table. The radio hissed. Out in the valley 30 miles away, Jake Harlan crouched behind a broken slab of rock with rain running down the back of his neck and 11 exhausted men around him. And he listened to that, and he made himself believe it because the alternative was to stop believing in anything at all. Copy Ridge Point, Harlan said finally. We'll hold. Tell your Overwatch to hurry. Then Harlan turned to the man crouched next to him. His second, a young petty officer named Diaz with a bloody bandage around his forearm and eyes that were still steady even now. Pass it down, Harlan said. Everybody holds. Nobody moves. We got somebody coming. Who? Diaz asked. Harlan almost laughed. You're not going to believe me. Try me, Chief. It's been a real believing kind of night. Harlan wiped rain out of his eyes. Command sending one shooter, Overwatch. Says she read the whole ambush off a radio recording. Says she's going to take out both guns and walk us out of here. Diaz stared at him. She? That's what the man said. Diaz looked out at the valley at the 2 hilltops, where the muzzle flashes had been lighting up the dark all night at the ordinary terrible distance between where they were pinned and where they needed to be. Then he looked back at Harlan. One woman, he said. One woman. Chief, with respect, that's the craziest thing I ever heard. I know. You believe it. Harlan was quiet for a second. Then he said, Diaz, 20 minutes ago, I was writing my wife's name in the mud with my finger, so it'd be the last thing I did. So yeah, right now I'll believe in anything that tells me to keep breathing. Pass it down. Nobody moves. We wait for the word clear. Diaz nodded, and he turned, and he began to crawl from man to man in the rain, carrying the strangest promise any of them had ever been given. And one by one, those 11 men heard it and made the same impossible choice their chief had made to bet the last of their hope on a stranger they'd never met. Back at Ridge Point, Captain Cole set down the handset and found that his hands were shaking. Coleman handed him a cup of coffee without a word. Cole took it and didn't drink it. She said 90 minutes, Cole said, and she did. You believe she can do it? Ray, honest answer. Just you and me. Coleman thought about it for a long time. He thought about the way she'd stood there so still while everyone shouted, the way she'd read the map without touching it, the way she'd said, I have done it before more times than I'll ever tell you, and the flat certainty in her voice when she said it. I believe, Coleman said slowly, that we just met somebody who's been living a whole life none of us are ever going to know about. And I believe that whatever that life was, it made her into exactly the thing those boys need tonight. Whether that's enough against 2 guns in a coordinated force? He shook his head. I don't know, but I'll tell you what I keep coming back to, sir. What's that? She didn't argue. When Shaw was tearing into her when everybody in that tent thought she was crazy, she didn't get angry. She didn't try to prove herself. She just told us the truth and then she went to do it. Coleman met Cole's eyes. In my experience, the ones who need to convince you are the ones who can't. The ones who can, they already know. And she already knew. Outside, the storm was getting worse. The wind had teeth in it now. And the rain came sideways, and somewhere out in that dark, a woman who told them her name was Ava Mercer was already a mile from the wire and moving fast and low and silent toward a valley full of men who wanted 12 Americans dead. And Cole did the only thing left to a commander who had spent his last option. He stood by the radio and he listened to the open channel where the enemy could be heard now, and then cold voices in a language most of the room didn't speak, and he waited. He waited for the sound of it changing. He waited for the first sign that somewhere out in the black, the thing he'd bet everything on was real. The minutes crawled. The rain drummed on the canvas. And every so often, the open channel would carry that voice, the one the intel section had started calling the Reaper, calm and patient and pleased with itself, giving orders to close the ring a little tighter. And each time Cole heard it, his stomach turned because the man sounded like he had all the time in the world. "He thinks he's already won," Coleman said, listening. "Maybe he has." "No, sir." Coleman shook his head slowly, and there was something almost like a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth, grim and tired and unwilling to give up. "See, that's the thing about a man who thinks he's already won. He stops looking behind him." 30 miles away on a ridge above the valley in the dark and the rain where no drone flew and no eye watched, Ava Mercer reached the high ground behind the eastern gun, and she lowered herself to the wet earth, and she went so still that she became part of it. Below her, she could see the whole shape of it now, exactly as she described it in the tent. The two hilltop positions. The muzzle flashes taking turns, one suppressing while the other reloaded, just like the recording. The cluster of pinned men in the low ground hanging on, and spread across the valley, moving with the confidence of hunters who thought the outcome was already decided, the ordinary rifleman who only mattered because of the two guns. She keyed her radio, once, soft. "Ridge Point, Overwatch, in position." In the command tent, Cole nearly dropped his coffee. He lunged for the handset. "Overwatch, Ridge Point, we copy you're in position. What do you need from us?" "Nothing," Ava said quietly. "I need you to keep your team still for the next 10 minutes, and I need you to not talk to me unless I talk to you first. From here on, I need silence on this net. Can you do that?" "We can do that." "Overwatch." Cole hesitated. "Godspeed." There was a pause, then, very softly, so soft that afterward Cole would wonder if he had imagined it, Ava Mercer said one more thing before she went dark. "There's no such thing," she said. "Just the shot, and the next one, and the one after that. That's all it ever is." And then the net went silent, and Captain Ryan Cole stood in a tent full of men who had run out of options, holding a radio, waiting to find out whether the stranger he'd bet everything on was a miracle or a mistake. He looked at the open channel where the Reaper's voice still murmured, patient, certain, unaware. He looked at Coleman, and he said the only prayer he had left, which was no prayer at all, just 3 quiet words spoken to no one and everyone at once. "Come on, Overwatch." Out on the ridge in the storm, the woman who wasn't supposed to matter settled in behind her position and looked down at the valley where 12 men were waiting to see if they'd live, and where one arrogant man with a radio still believed he'd already won. She breathed out slow and even, the way she'd been taught a lifetime and 100 faces ago. She looked at the first gun, she looked at the second, and in the dark, where no one could see her and no one would ever be able to prove she'd been there at all, Ava Mercer got to work. The first shot did not sound like a gunshot, in the storm with the wind screaming and the rain hammering everything. It was just a flat crack that the valley swallowed almost before it happened. But up on the eastern hilltop, the man behind the machine gun stopped firing. He didn't slump dramatically. He didn't cry out. He simply folded forward over his weapon and went still. And the gun went quiet, and for the first time in 3 hours, one whole side of the L-shaped trap fell silent. Down in the low ground, Chief Jake Harlan noticed it before anyone else did because he had spent the last 3 hours learning the rhythm of those two guns, the way a man learns the sound of his own heartbeat. He knew when the eastern gun fired and when it reloaded and when it handed off to the western one. And now suddenly the eastern gun had missed its turn. "Diaz," Harlan hissed. "The east gun. You hear that?" Diaz lifted his head a fraction of an inch. "I don't hear anything, Chief." "That's what I'm telling you. It stopped." For about 10 seconds, the two of them crouched there in the mud and listened to something they hadn't heard all night, which was the absence of that gun. The western gun kept hammering away its tracers, reaching across the valley, but the crossfire was broken now. The corner of the kill zone that the Eastern gun had owned all night was suddenly empty. And then the encrypted net crackled softly in Harlan's ear, and a woman's voice calm as still water said, "Bravo, actual Overwatch. East gun is down. Do not move yet. There's a second one and I'm working it. Hold your position and keep your men flat. Acknowledge." Harlan pressed his hand to his ear like he could push the voice deeper into his skull, make it more real. "Overwatch Bravo actual, we copy," he whispered. "We copy. We're holding. Just, who are you? Where are you?" "Behind them," Ava said. "That's all that matters. Stay down." The net went quiet again. Diaz was staring at him. Was that her? That was her. She got the East gun. She got the East gun. Diaz let out a breath that shook on its way out, and Harlan saw something come back into the young man's eyes that had been slowly draining it out of them all night. Hope was a dangerous thing to feel in a place like this. It could get a man killed if he let it make him stupid. But it was also the only fuel any of them had left, and right now a stranger on a hilltop had just given them a full tank of it. Up on the ridge, Ava Mercer had already moved. She did not stay where she'd taken the first shot. That was the mistake amateurs made, the mistake that got people killed staying in one place long enough to be found. The moment the Eastern gunner dropped, she was sliding backward off her position, low and quick, repositioning toward a new angle that would give her a clean line on the Western gun on the far hilltop. She had studied both positions from the tense map in her mind, and she had memorized the ground, and now she flowed across it like water, finding the low places, and she made no sound at all. It took her 4 minutes to get where she needed to be. 4 minutes while the Western gun kept firing, while the enemy commander somewhere down in the valley kept giving his patient confident orders, not yet understanding that half his trap had gone dark. But someone was starting to understand. Down among the enemy fighters, a runner scrambled up the eastern slope to check on the gun that had stopped, and he found the gunner dead over his weapon with a single clean wound and the loader dead beside him and no one else. The runner froze. He looked around in the dark and the rain and saw nothing. No muzzle flash, no attacker, no explanation. He grabbed his own radio and started shouting. Ava heard the tone of the enemy's open channel change, even without understanding every word. She heard the calm break. She heard the first thread of alarm run through it, and she knew her window was closing. She found the Western gun in her sights. The gunner was still firing, still pouring rounds down into the valley, completely unaware that his partner across the way was dead and that the ridge behind him held the reason. Ava breathed out slow and even. She thought about the 12 men in the low ground. She thought about nothing else. And then the flat crack came again, lost in the storm, and the Western gunner pitched sideways off his weapon, and the second gun fell silent. And the L-shaped trap that had held 12 Navy SEALs helpless for 3 hours simply ceased to exist. The valley went strange and quiet, not silent. There was still the storm, still scattered, rifle fire from the ordinary fighters spread across the ground. But the 2 heavy guns that had been the spine of the whole ambush were gone, and every fighter in that valley could feel it, even if they didn't understand it yet. In the command tent at Ridgepoint, Captain Cole had been standing rigid at the radio for 12 minutes, and when the encrypted net came alive again, he flinched like he'd been touched with a live wire. "Ridgepoint Overwatch. Both guns are down. The ambush is broken. I'm about to move your team. Stand by, Eiston." Coleman, who had been standing beside Cole the whole time with his arms crossed and his jaw set, closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. "Both guns," Cole said. "Then." He looked at Coleman. "She said both guns." "I heard her, sir. In 12 minutes, 2 emplaced heavy weapons defended positions in a storm on foot alone." Cole shook his head slowly, and there was something almost frightened in his face. "Ray, what did we let walk out of this tent?" "I don't know, sir," Coleman said quietly, "but I'm starting to think Shaw's wrong about who should be embarrassed tonight." Out on the ridge, Ava was already talking fast and low, her voice never rising, never hurrying, but every word carrying total command. "Bravo actual Overwatch. Listen carefully. Both guns are down, but you are not clear yet. You've still got fighters spread across the valley floor, and they know something's wrong. In about 60 seconds, they're going to start moving either to run or to consolidate, and I want your team moving before they figure out which. On my mark, I need you to take your men out to the north. Not the tree line you were eyeing before that's still covered. The north toward the finger of high ground. I'll be watching every step. Anything that raises a weapon at you, and put it down before it fires. Do you trust me, Chief?" Harlan looked around at his 11 men, at their faces streaked with mud and rain, at the 2 wounded ones being held up by their brothers, at the whole exhausted, broken cluster of them, who had spent 3 hours believing they were going to die here. "Overwatch," he said. "I don't have a choice but to trust you, but I want you to know, whoever you are, if you're lying to us, you're about to watch 12 men die, and I hope to God you can live with it." "I've watched men die when I was lying to them," Ava said, and there was something in her voice for just a second, something old and low and heavy before it smoothed back over. "That's why I don't do it anymore. Now get your men up. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, move." And Jake Harlan stood up out of cover for the first time in 3 hours, and nothing killed him. He almost couldn't believe it. His whole body was braced for the round that would tear through him, the round that had been waiting all night, and it didn't come. He turned and grabbed the man nearest him and hauled him up, and he started shoving his team north. Moving, and behind him and around him, his SEALs came up out of the mud like men rising from their own graves, and they ran. A fighter to their left saw them and swung his rifle up. He never fired it. There was a crack from the ridge, and he dropped, and the SEALs kept running. Another fighter farther out rose from behind cover and shouted and lifted his weapon. Crack. Down. And still the SEALs kept running, and now they were starting to understand, really understand, that the voice on the radio was real, that there was truly someone up there in the dark watching over every step they took, catching every threat before it could reach them. "She's really up there," Diaz gasped as he ran. "Chief, she's really up there. She's picking them off. She's—" "Run, Diaz," Harlan barked. "Just run. Thank her later." Down in the valley, the enemy commander finally understood. Ava heard it in his voice before she saw it in his fighters. The open channel, which had been so calm and patient all night, suddenly went sharp and fast and angry. The Reaper had realized his guns were dead and his prey was escaping, and that somewhere in the dark behind his own positions was a single shooter dismantling everything he'd built. And Ava heard the exact moment his confidence turned into something else, something uglier, because a man like that did not accept losing gracefully. She watched his fighters change behavior. They stopped acting like hunters closing a trap and started acting like a force that had just realized it was under attack from an unseen direction. Some of them broke and ran, but others, the more disciplined ones, began turning around, began looking uphill, began trying to find her. They wouldn't. She'd already moved again. But the danger had changed shape. As long as they didn't know where she was, she owned the whole valley. The moment they pinned her position, the math flipped, because she was one person, and they were many, and one person could only be in one place. "Bravo, actual Overwatch. Keep moving north. Don't stop. You're doing fine. But the enemy's on to me now, so my fire's going to get more selective. I can't cover every angle anymore. Push hard for that high ground and get your men into the rocks. Once you're in the rocks, you can defend yourselves and I can breathe. Go. Go." Harlan drove his team up the northern slope with everything he had left. 2 of his men were hit, being half carried, and every step was agony. But they made the high ground, and they poured into the broken rocks, and for the first time all night, they had cover that the enemy couldn't easily flank. And they turned their weapons outward, and they were a fighting force again instead of trapped prey. "Overwatch Bravo actual. We're in the rocks. We're set," Harlan panted. "We got good cover. We can hold here." "Good," Ava said. "Now stay there and let me work. Do not send anybody out. I mean it, Chief. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, keep your men in those rocks. If you send someone out into the open, I have to choose between covering them and covering the rest of you, and I won't do it. Understand?" "Understood." "Good man." And then Ava Mercer went to work in earnest, and what happened over the next several minutes was something that Jake Harlan and every man with him would talk about for the rest of their lives on the rare occasions they could talk about it at all. Because the enemy came for the rocks. Of course they did. Their prey had escaped the kill zone but was now cornered on the high ground, and the commander threw his remaining disciplined fighters at that position, trying to overrun the SEALs before whoever was up on the ridge could stop him. Wave is too strong a word. There weren't enough of them for waves, but they came in coordinated rushes using cover bounding forward exactly the way trained fighters do. And one by one they died before they could reach the rocks. The SEALs barely had to fire. They'd raise their weapons at a fighter rushing toward them, and before they could pull the trigger, the fighter would drop, and a half second later, they'd hear the flat crack roll across the valley from somewhere up on the ridge. It happened again and again. A fighter would break from cover, sprint 3 steps and fall. Another would try to flank around the right side of the rocks and fall. Another would try the left and fall. "I'm not even shooting," Diaz said, and there was something close to awe in his voice and something close to fear, too. "Chief, I haven't fired a round in 2 minutes. She's getting all of them, every single one. How is she getting all of them?" Harlan didn't answer because he didn't have an answer. He crouched in the rocks with his rifle up and his eyes scanning the dark, and he watched a single shooter he had never met systematically take apart an enemy force that had an hour ago held his team dead to rights. And a strange, cold thought settled into the back of his mind, one he didn't fully examine yet but couldn't ignore either. This wasn't just good shooting. This was something else. The precision of it, the calm of it, the total control, the way she never missed and never wasted a round, and always seemed to know exactly where the next threat would come from before it came. This was a person who had done this 1,000 times. This was a person who had lived in this exact terrible space, one shooter against many so many times that it had stopped being extraordinary to her and become simply what she was. Who does that, Harlan thought? Who becomes that? Up on the ridge, Ava did not think about any of it. She had emptied her mind of everything except the work the way she always did, the way she'd trained herself to across more years and more valleys than she'd ever admit to anyone. There was only the shot and the next one and the one after that. There was the fighter breaking left, and she took him. There was the fighter trying to set up a base of fire behind a fallen log, and she took him before he could get his weapon leveled. There was the runner going for the enemy commander's position, probably to relay orders, and she let him go because he wasn't a threat to the SEALs and every round mattered. She counted. She always counted. It was a habit older than she could remember, a way of imposing order on chaos, a way of keeping one small part of her mind separate from what her hands were doing. 12, 13, 14. The enemy commander understood now that he could not overrun the rocks. Every fighter he sent died before reaching them. So he changed his plan, and Ava heard the change in his voice on the open channel, and her stomach tightened, because a smart enemy was always more dangerous than a brave one, and this one was both. He stopped attacking the rocks. Instead, he began pulling his fighters back and turning them fully around on all of them, everything he had left, and he sent them uphill toward the ridge. He decided the shooter was the real threat, the only threat, and if he killed the shooter, the SEALs in the rocks would be trapped again with no one to protect them. It was the correct decision. It was exactly what Ava would have done in his place, and it meant that now the enemy was coming for her. "Bravo, actual Overwatch." Her voice was still calm, but faster now, tighter. "The enemy's disengaged from your position. They're all coming for me now. That's good news for you and bad news for me. You're going to lose contact with my fire for a while. Do not, I repeat, do not come out of those rocks to help me. You'd never find me in time, and you'd only die in the open. You hold that high ground and you keep your men alive. That's the mission. Do you copy?" "Overwatch negative," Harlan said immediately, and there was steel in his voice, now the old iron of a man who did not leave people behind. "You are not doing this alone. You just saved 12 men. We are not going to sit in a hole and listen to you die. Give me your position and let me send—" "Chief," her voice cut through his quiet and absolute. "Listen to me. If you come out of those rocks, you will die and you will not save me, and everything I just did will have been for nothing. I did not take out 2 machine guns and a valley full of fighters so you could throw your men away trying to be heroes. You have a wife. I heard it in your voice earlier when you thought you were dying. You have people who need you to come home. So you are going to stay in those rocks, and you are going to let me do what I'm good at, and you are going to trust that I've been in worse spots than this and walked out of every one of them. Can you give me that? Please." The word please undid him a little. It was the only time all night her voice had cracked even slightly, the only time she'd let a single human seam show, and it hit Harlan harder than any command could have. "Copy, Overwatch," he said, and his voice was rough. "We'll hold, but you walk out of that valley. You hear me? You walk out. That's an order, and I don't care that I've got no right to give you one." There was a pause, and then softly, almost warmly, Ava said, "I'll do my best, Chief." And the net went dark, and Jake Harlan crouched in the rocks with his men and had to sit there and listen, while somewhere out in the storm, a woman he'd never met faced down everything the enemy had left alone. What followed was the longest 10 minutes of Harlan's life, and he'd had some long ones. They couldn't see her. They could only hear it. The flat crack of her shots rolling down off the ridge again and again, spaced out with a terrible steady rhythm. And between the shots, the enemy's own fire, the chatter of their rifles as they pushed uphill toward the source, trying to pin her, trying to flush her, trying to find the ghost that was killing them one at a time in the dark. Every time Harlan heard a burst of enemy fire, his gut clenched because he thought, this is it, they got her. And then a moment later would come her flat crack again from a slightly different place than before, and he'd realize she'd already moved. She was still alive. She was still working. She never stayed put. Every shot came from a new position. The enemy would concentrate their fire on where the last shot had come from, and she was already gone, already somewhere else, already dropping the next one. She keeps moving, Diaz breathed, tracking it by sound. Every shot, different spot. They can't find her. Chief, they can't find her. She's like a ghost. I know, Harlan said. I know. Just pray, Diaz. That's all we can do for her now. Pray. Up on the ridge, Ava was not thinking about prayer. She was thinking about the ground and the geometry and the number of fighters left and the fact that her window of total control had closed, and she was now in a real fight, moving and shooting, using the terrain and the dark and the storm, the way she'd been taught to across a lifetime, 15, 16, 17. She wasn't in danger yet. Not real danger because the enemy still couldn't fix her position, and as long as they couldn't fix her, she could dance in the dark forever. But she could feel the fight tightening. The commander was smart. He'd stopped throwing his fighters at her in a mob and had started using them methodically, some laying down, suppressing fire to make her keep her head down, while others advanced, trying to close the distance, trying to get close enough that her long-range advantage disappeared and it became a knife fight in the dark where numbers won. She needed to end it before it got there. She needed to take the commander. She'd been listening to his voice all night, and now she started using it. Every time he transmitted, he gave away a little bit about where he was, not his exact position, but a direction, a general area. She built a picture. She narrowed it down, and she began to move not away from the enemy now, but toward them, toward the center of the picture, toward the man whose voice had been so calm and patient all night, and was now growing ragged with fury and disbelief. 18, 19, 20. Two more fighters between her and the commander. She took them both one after the other so fast that the second one didn't even have time to react to the first one falling. And then she was there close enough and she saw him. He was crouched behind a rock with his radio gesturing, shouting into it, sending men to their deaths in a valley he'd been so sure he owned. The Reaper. The man who had wanted 12 Americans to bleed slow on an open channel so their command could listen. The man who had smiled into the storm and said no mercy. Ava settled her breathing. She looked at him down the length of everything she was. And then because some old part of her needed him to know, because there was a small hard core of her that had spent a whole life doing this to men exactly like him and would not let this one die comfortable in his confusion, she keyed her radio to the enemy's open frequency, the one he'd been broadcasting his cruelty on all night, and she said in his own language 4 quiet words that meant, look behind you. She saw him freeze. She saw him understand. She saw him start to turn. 21. He never finished the turn. The Reaper folded over his radio and went still, and the open channel that had carried his voice all night went silent, and across the valley, his surviving fighters heard that silence and understood what it meant, and whatever fight was left in them drained out into the mud. There were only a handful of them now anyway, the disciplined corps gone, and without the commander, and without the guns, and with a ghost still killing them from the dark, they did the only thing left to do. They ran. Ava took 2 more as they fled, the 2 who ran toward the rocks instead of away, because she would not let a single one of them reach the seals even in retreat. 22, 23. The last 2 she let go. They were running north and west away from everything, no longer a threat to anyone. And she had never in her life killed a man who wasn't a threat, and she wasn't going to start on a mountain in the rain at the end of a night like this. She let them run into the dark, and she watched them go, and then she lowered her weapon, and for the first time in nearly 2 hours, she was still. The valley was quiet, truly quiet now, just a storm. She keyed the encrypted net. Bravo, actual Overwatch. Her voice was very tired. Suddenly, the calm still there, but hollowed out a person at the bottom of an enormous effort. The valley's clear. Their commander's down and the rest have broken and run. It's over. You're safe. Say again, you are safe. Get your wounded stabilized and hold your position, and I'll guide the extraction in when the weather breaks. You did good, Chief. Your men did good. It's over. In the rocks, Jake Harlan pressed his forehead against the cold, wet stone and closed his eyes, and for a moment, he couldn't speak at all. Around him, his men were realizing it too, that the shooting had stopped, that the fear that had lived in their chests all night was finally slowly letting go. Diaz was laughing, a broken, shaky laugh with tears in it. One of the wounded men was crying openly and not ashamed of it. Somebody was praying out loud, "Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God." Harlan finally found his voice. "Overwatch Bravo Actual." He had to stop and clear his throat. I don't have words. There aren't words for what you just did. You want to tell me how one person does what you just did, because I've been doing this 13 years and I never saw anything like it. Not close, not even close. There was a long pause on the net. You don't want to know, Chief, Ava said quietly. You really don't. Just take your men home. That's the only part that matters. I want to meet you, Harlan said. When this is done, I want to shake your hand and I want to look you in the eye and I want to say thank you like a man ought to. You give me that much. After what you did tonight, you owe me a face. Another pause. Longer this time. Okay, bow, Ava said finally, and something in the way she said it, some reluctance, some old wariness, made Harlan's cold thought from earlier stir again in the back of his mind. Who becomes that? Who does this 1,000 times until it's just what they are? Okay, Chief, when it's done, you'll get your face. 30 miles away in the command tent at Ridgepoint, Captain Cole and Master Sergeant Coleman stood at the radio and listened to all of it, and neither of them had said a word in 10 minutes because there was nothing to say. They had sent one person out into the storm against everything, and that one person had just done something that Cole knew with total certainty he would never fully be able to put in a report because no one who read it would believe it. 25, Coleman said finally very quietly. He'd been keeping his own count, listening to the shots. Sir, I counted 25, give or take. 2 machine gun crews, all their spotters, their radio men, a whole coordinated force, and their commander. 1 shooter, under 2 hours, in this. Cole didn't answer. He was staring at the radio like it might explain something. Sir, Coleman said, who is she? I don't know, Cole said, and then slowly, but I'm going to find out, because a person doesn't just appear on my FOB doing logistics paperwork with a skill set like that. Nobody becomes what we just heard by accident, Ray. That was a whole life. That was somebody who spent 20 years learning to do exactly what she just did, and then somehow ended up standing in the back of my tent holding a cup of cold coffee where nobody would look at her twice. And I want to know why. I want to know who trained her and who she worked for, and why there's a person walking around this base who can do that and nobody knew. Coleman was quiet for a moment. Then he said, maybe that's the answer, sir. What is, maybe nobody's supposed to know. Maybe that's the whole point of her. People like that, the real ones, the ones this good, they don't exist on paper. They can't. It's the job. The whole job is that you were never there. He looked at Cole. We're going to pull her file, and I'll bet you right now, sir, I'll bet you anything you want, that file's going to tell us nothing. No record, no history, nothing before she showed up. Because whoever she really is, she was built to be exactly the thing that just walked into that valley and out the other side and disappeared into the dark like she was never there at all. Cole looked at him for a long moment, and out in the storm, somewhere on a ridge, above a valley full of the dead, Ava Mercer slung her weapon over her shoulder and looked down one last time at the 12 men she'd saved and began the long walk back through the rain alone, exactly the way she'd come. The walk back took Ava Mercer almost 2 hours, and she made every step of it alone, and she wanted it that way. There was a thing that happened to her after the work, a hollowing out, a coming down from the cold place she went to when she did what she did, and she had learned a long time ago that no one should see her in that hour. So she moved through the storm in silence, and she let the rain wash the valley off of her, and by the time the lights of Ridgepoint appeared through the trees, she had put herself back together on the outside, even if the inside took longer. But the extraction had beaten her home. The weather had broken just before dawn, exactly as she'd predicted, and the birds had gone in and pulled the SEAL team out of the rocks and flown them back to base. And so when Ava walked out of the tree line and back through the wire, tired and soaked and wanting nothing but a dark corner to be alone in, she walked straight into the one thing she'd been avoiding her whole life. She walked into being seen. Because word had spread. Of course it had. 12 men had gone into a valley and come out alive, and every one of them had a story to tell, and the story was already moving through Ridge Point like fire through dry grass. The Overwatch, the ghost on the ridge, the single shooter who'd broken an ambush that should have killed them all. And as Ava came through the wire in the gray light of morning, she saw men turning to look at her men she'd never spoken to. Men who a day ago wouldn't have known she existed, and now they were looking at her the way you look at something you can't quite believe is real. She kept her head down. She kept walking. She wanted her rack in darkness and to be no one again. She didn't get it. Chief Jake Harlan was waiting for her. He was standing outside the medical tent where his wounded were being treated, and he'd clearly been standing there a while watching the tree line waiting, because the second she came through the wire, he pushed off the wall and started toward her, and there was no avoiding him, no melting away, nothing to do but stop and let him come. He stopped a few feet in front of her. He was a big man worn down by the night, one side of his face crusted with dried blood from a graze he hadn't bothered to have looked at. And he stood there and he looked at her, this quiet, soaked woman who didn't look like anything at all. And Ava watched him try to make her match the thing he'd heard on the radio and fail. "You're Overwatch," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm just a contractor, Chief," Ava said. "I think you want somebody else." "No." Harlan shook his head slowly. "No, I know that voice. I listened to that voice for 2 hours while it kept me and my men alive. I'd know it anywhere for the rest of my life. It's you." He kept looking at her, searching her face. "I don't understand it, but it's you." Ava didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. "I owe you my life," Harlan said, and his voice, which had been so steady, thickened suddenly. "Every man in that tent owes you his life. 12 of us. 12. You know what that means? 12 men go home now. 12 families. I got a wife, Diaz, my second. He's got a little girl, 3 years old. She's going to see her daddy again because of you. And I don't even..." He stopped and pressed his lips together and got himself back under control. "I don't even know your name. Your real one." "Ava," she said after a moment. It cost her something to give it. "Ava Mercer." "Is that real?" She almost smiled. "It's real enough." Harlan reached into his pocket then, and he took out something small and he held it up between them. It was a coined dark metal worn smooth at the edges from years of being carried. A SEAL legacy coin, the kind that passed from a warrior's hand to the hand of someone who'd proven themselves worthy of the brotherhood, the kind that was never given lightly and never given to an outsider ever. "I want you to have this," Harlan said. "I've carried it 11 years. It was given to me by a man who's dead now, a better man than me, and I've never once thought about giving it to anybody because nobody ever earned it. Until last night." He held it out. "You earned it, so take it, please." Ava looked at the coin and something crossed her face, something complicated and old, and for a moment Harlan thought she was going to reach for it, but she didn't. "I can't take that, Chief," she said quietly. "Why not?" "Because it means something. It means you belong to something, a team, a brotherhood. Men who bled next to each other and earned the right to call each other family." She shook her head. "I don't belong to any team. I never have. I'm not what you think I am, and I'm not one of you, and if you give me that coin, you're giving it to the wrong person. Give it to somebody who'll be there tomorrow. I won't be." "You were there last night," Harlan said. "You were more there than anybody. When command failed and the air was grounded and the whole world had written us off, you were the one who walked out into that storm. That's what the coin means, Ava. Not the paperwork, not the team. It means when it all fell apart, you stepped out of the dark and you kept our men alive. You did that. Tonight, whether you want it or not, whether you belong to anybody or not, you were one of us." The two of them stood there in the gray morning, and Ava looked at the coin in his outstretched hand, and Harlan watched something war across her face that he couldn't name, some argument she was having with herself that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with a life he couldn't imagine. And then slowly she reached out and took the coin. She closed her fingers around it. She looked at it for a long moment. And when she looked back up at Harlan, there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Something raw, something that in anyone else he might have called grief. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll keep it. But I need you to do something for me in return, Chief. I need you to forget you ever met me. I need you and your men to go home and hug your wives and hold your daughters and live good long lives. And I need you to never ever tell this story with my name in it. Can you do that? Can you give me that, Ava? Please, Jake." And it was the first time she'd used his name, and it stopped him cold. "You don't understand what I am or where I come from, and it's better for you if you never do. People like me, we only stay alive by staying invisible. The moment there's a name and a face and a story, that's the moment it all comes apart. So please, let me be the ghost. Let me be the thing nobody can prove was ever there. It's the only way this ends well for both of us." Harlan looked at her for a long, long moment, and whatever he saw in her face, it convinced him because slowly he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you got it. As far as anybody official ever hears, there was no shooter. We fought our way out. That's the story." He paused. "But my men are going to know the truth. They're going to know for the rest of their lives that a woman named Ava walked into that valley and saved every one of them. I can't take that from them, and I won't. That truth belongs to them." "That's fair," Ava said softly. "That much is fair." And then, because she couldn't stand to be seen a moment longer, she gave him one small nod, and she stepped around him, and she walked away toward the far end of the base, toward the shadows, toward being no one again. Harlan watched her go, and he stood there holding the empty air where his coin had been, and he had the strangest feeling that he'd just spoken to someone who was already halfway gone and already fading, already becoming a story that no one would believe. But if Ava thought that giving Harlan her name and taking his coin was the end of it, she was wrong. Because 200 yards away in the command tent, Captain Ryan Cole had already started pulling on the thread that would unravel everything. It was just after 8 in the morning when Cole sat down at the secure terminal with Coleman standing behind him and typed in the name. Ava Mercer, contractor, logistics. He pulled her personnel file, the one that had gotten her onto Ridgepoint in the first place, the one that HR and security had both signed off on, and he started to read. And within about 90 seconds, he knew something was very wrong. "Ray," he said, "come look at this." Coleman leaned over his shoulder. "Read it," Cole said. "Read the whole thing and tell me what you see." Coleman read it. It was a complete file on its face. Name, date of birth, social security number, contracting company, background check, references, clearance level, everything a file was supposed to have. It looked at a glance exactly like the thousands of other contractor files Coleman had seen in 30 years. "Looks normal, sir," Coleman said slowly. "What am I missing?" "Look closer. The references. Call 1. Coleman looked. There were 3 professional references, listed 3 names with phone numbers and titles at previous employers. He picked up the secure phone and dialed the first one. It rang twice, and then a recording told him the number was not in service. He dialed the second. Same recording. Not in service. He dialed the third, and this time it rang and rang and rang, and no one ever answered. Coleman set the phone down slowly. "None of them are real," Cole said. "I already tried. The companies she supposedly worked for before this, 2 of them don't exist. The third one exists, but has no record of anybody named Ava Mercer ever working there. The background check is stamped complete and approved, but when I try to pull the actual investigation file, the one with the details, there's nothing there. Just the stamp, just the approval, like somebody approved a check that was never actually done." Coleman felt something cold move down his spine. "Sir, that's not a sloppy file. A sloppy file has gaps. This file's the opposite. This file is complete. It's got everything it's supposed to have, all the right boxes checked, all the right stamps. Somebody built this. Somebody built a perfect file for a person who doesn't have a past." "That's exactly what I think," Cole said, "and it gets stranger. Watch this." He typed for a moment, pulling up the clearance record. Ava Mercer's file listed her as holding a standard secret clearance appropriate for a logistics contractor. Nothing unusual. But Cole ran a deeper query, the kind that most people didn't have the access to, run cross-referencing her identifiers against the classified clearance databases at a level above what her file claimed. And the query came back with an anomaly. "There," Cole said. "You see it." Coleman leaned in and read it, and his face changed. "Sir, that says It says her identifiers are associated with a clearance level that is above what I'm cleared to even see the name of, Cole said quietly. Her file says secret, but the deep query says there's another record, a real one buried somewhere I can't reach at a classification so high that when I ask about it, the system won't even tell me what it is. It just tells me to stop asking and refers me to an office I've never heard of. The two men sat in silence for a moment. So the logistics contractor, Coleman said slowly, the quiet woman drinking cold coffee in the back of the tent, the one Shaw wanted to throw out, is actually somebody with a classification level so high that our base commander isn't even allowed to know it exists. That's what it looks like. Then what the hell is she doing here, sir? Pushing paper, tracking equipment. Why would somebody like that be hiding on a forward operating base, doing a job a 19-year-old could do? And that was the question, wasn't it? That was the question Cole couldn't stop turning over. Because there were only a few reasons a person like that ended up somewhere like this, and none of them were good. And all of them meant that Ava Mercer was a great deal more than she appeared, and possibly a great deal more dangerous. Maybe she's hiding, Cole said, from something or someone. Or maybe she's here on purpose, Coleman said. Maybe somebody put her here, watching something, watching someone, and last night just happened to be the night she couldn't stay invisible anymore. Cole leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He hadn't slept, none of them had, and now on top of everything he had a ghost on his base with a manufactured past and a clearance he couldn't see a woman who'd killed 25 enemy fighters in under 2 hours and then walk back through the wire like she'd been out for a stroll. I have to report this, Cole said. The action last night. I have to write it up. And I don't know how, because if I tell the truth that a single unarmed-looking contractor broke a Tier 1 ambush and killed 24 fighters, nobody believes me. And they start asking questions, and those questions lead straight to her, and I've got a bad feeling that's exactly what she doesn't want. So don't write the truth, Coleman said quietly. Cole looked at him. I mean it, sir. Harlan already came to me this morning before you were up. He told me his team fought their way out, said they took the machine gun nest themselves in the confusion of the storm, said it was a hard fight and they got lucky. He looked me dead in the eye and told me that story, and I knew it was a lie, and he knew I knew, and neither one of us said so. Coleman paused. He's protecting her, sir. And I think maybe we should too, because whoever she is, whatever she is, she walked out into that storm when nobody made her, when she could have stood in the back of that tent and let those boys die, and nobody would have ever known she could have stopped it. She didn't do that. She went. And a person who does that, sir, I don't much care what her file says or doesn't say. I care what she did. Cole was quiet for a long time. You're saying we bury it. I'm saying we protect the 12 men who came home and the one person who brought them home. I'm saying we write a report that's true enough to pass and quiet enough to keep her invisible. And I'm saying we let her be whatever she needs to be because she earned that much last night and then some. And Cole might have agreed. He was already halfway to agreeing. But before he could say so, the tent flap opened and Lieutenant Shaw walked in, and the look on Shaw's face told them both that the situation had just gotten more complicated. Sir, Shaw said, you need to know something, and you're not going to like it. What is it, Dan? I've been asking around this morning about last night, about her. Shaw's jaw was tight. He'd spent the night being wrong in front of everyone, and it had not made him gracious. It had made him sharp and defensive and determined to find something to be right about. And I found something. Word came through the intel section about an hour ago. The enemy force we hit last night, the one she took apart. It wasn't a local insurgent cell. Intel's still piecing it together, but the commander, the one they were calling the Reaper, he wasn't some regional warlord. He was connected to something bigger, something organized, something that operates across borders and has resources and reach that a local cell could never have. Cole frowned. Meaning what? Meaning Shaw said that whoever these people are, they're going to notice that their coordinated ambush got dismantled by a single shooter. They're going to want to know who did it. And organizations like that, sir, they don't forget and they don't let things go. Somebody just made themselves a very serious enemy. And that somebody is sitting on our base right now under a fake name. And if these people ever figure out who she is, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. And it was in that moment, standing in the command tent in the gray light of morning, that the truth of what had happened last night began to shift and deepen for all three of them. Because it wasn't just a rescue anymore. It wasn't just a ghost and a coin and a story to bury. Ava Mercer had walked into that valley and killed the commander of something powerful and patient and far-reaching, something that now had every reason in the world to hunt her. And she'd done it to save 12 men she'd never met. She knew, Cole said slowly. The realization landed on him with real weight. She had to have known who they were. A person with her skills, her background, whatever it is, she doesn't miss something like that. She would have recognized the tactics, the discipline, the organization. She knew exactly who she was going up against out there. She knew what it would mean. She knew that killing that commander would paint a target on her back that might never come off. And she went anyway, Coleman said quietly. And she went anyway, Cole repeated. The three men stood in silence. Even Shaw, who had wanted so badly to be right, who had wanted to walk in here and prove that the contractor was a problem, found that the thing he'd discovered didn't feel like a victory at all. It felt like something heavier. Because he'd walked in expecting to expose a fraud, and instead he'd uncovered the true measure of what she'd sacrificed. She could have stayed invisible, Shaw said almost to himself. She could have stood in the back of this tent and kept her secret and let those men die, and nobody would ever have known she could have saved them. Her cover would have been perfectly intact. She'd have been safe, and instead she blew the whole thing, gave up years of hiding, made herself a target for people who will never stop hunting her, all to save 12 strangers. He shook his head slowly. God, I called her insane. I called it insanity. And she just quietly went and did the bravest thing I've ever seen a human being do, and I stood here and mocked her for it. Cole looked at the young lieutenant, and some of the hardness he'd been feeling toward Shaw softened, because at least the man had the decency to see it now. We all missed it, Dan, Cole said. Every one of us. We looked right at her for 3 weeks and saw nothing. That was the point. That was the whole point of her. He stood up. Come on, all three of us. We're going to go find her, and we're going to say thank you like human beings, and then we're going to figure out how to keep her safe because she just made an enemy that we may have to help her survive. But when the three of them walked out of the command tent and across the base to the far quarters where Ava Mercer had been billeted, and Cole knocked on the door and no one answered, and Coleman pushed it open, they found the room empty. The rack was made. The small space was spotless. There was no gear, no bag, no sign that anyone had ever lived there at all. It was as if the room had been waiting empty the whole time, as if the woman who had stayed in it for 3 weeks had been a rumor and nothing more. She was gone. On the bare mattress in the center, placed carefully where it couldn't be missed, was a single object. It was the coin, Harlan's coin, the Seal Legacy coin she'd taken from his hand 2 hours earlier, with something like grief in her eyes. Cole picked it up slowly and turned it over in his fingers. She gave it back, Coleman said quietly. She took it so as not to insult him. And then she gave it back because she meant what she said. She doesn't belong to any team. When did she leave? Cole asked. How there's no transport off this base except the birds, and the birds are all accounted for. Nobody signed her out. Nobody saw her go. How does a person vanish off a secured forward operating base in the mountains? No one had an answer. And it was Shaw standing in the doorway of that empty, spotless room who said the thing they were all thinking, the thing that made the hair stand up on the back of Cole's neck. The same way she appeared, sir, Shaw said quietly. Nobody saw her come either. We just looked up one day and she was here doing paperwork being nobody. And now we've looked up and she's gone. Maybe that's what she is. Maybe that's what she's always been. Somebody who's only ever there for exactly as long as she needs to be, and then he gestured at the empty room. And then it's like she was never there at all. Cole closed his hand around the coin. Outside, the sun was climbing over the mountains, burning off the last of the storm, and somewhere out beyond the wire, moving through country that no aircraft was watching, and no sensor could track a woman with no past and a manufactured name and a life no one would ever know, was already miles away and getting farther, carrying nothing but the weight of what she'd done and the certainty that she could never stop moving. And back in the empty room, 3 men stood around a bare mattress and a single coin and understood that they had been part of something they would never be able to explain and never be able to prove and never be able to forget. For 6 days, Ava Mercer was a ghost again, and for 6 days, Captain Ryan Cole could not let it go. He should have. Every rational part of him said so. The men were home. The mission, however strange, had ended in the best outcome anyone could have imagined. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to write the quiet report that kept her invisible, let the whole impossible night fade into rumor, and move on. But Cole couldn't do it, because a thing had lodged in him that morning in the empty room, and it wouldn't come loose, and it kept him up at night. A woman had walked into a storm to save 12 strangers, made herself the enemy of something powerful and patient, and then vanished, carrying all of that alone. And Cole couldn't stop thinking that somebody somewhere ought to at least know who she was, ought to at least be able to say her name. So on the 6th day, he did something he probably shouldn't have. He picked up the secure phone and he called the office, the one the deep query had referred him to, the one at the classification level he wasn't supposed to be able to see. It took most of the day to get through. He was bounced between 3 different numbers, put on hold for over an hour, made to state his identity and his clearance and his reason for calling more times than he could count. But Cole was stubborn, and he was a base commander, and eventually a voice came on the line that was different from the others. Older, quieter, a voice that didn't waste words. "This is a number you're not supposed to have, Captain," the voice said. "I'd like to know how you got it." "A deep clearance query referred me here," Cole said. 6 days ago, I ran a check on a contractor who was billeted on my base, Ava Mercer. The system told me to contact this office. There was a long silence on the line, long enough that Cole thought the call might have dropped. "Say that name again," the voice said finally, and something had changed in it. The disinterest was gone. It had gone very still and very focused, the way a man goes still when he hears something he was not expecting to ever hear again. "Ava Mercer," Cole said. "She was on my base for 3 weeks doing logistics work. 6 days ago, there was an incident. A SEAL team got trapped in a valley and she got them out alone, and then she disappeared. I've been trying to find out who she really is because her file is fabricated top to bottom, and the clearance query pointed me to you." The silence this time was even longer. "Captain," the voice said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What did you say her name was exactly?" "The full name." "Ava Mercer." "That's not her name." Cole's grip tightened on the phone. "Then what is—" "It doesn't matter what her name is. What matters is that you've just told me something that isn't possible." The voice paused. "The woman you're describing, the woman who did what you're describing on the date you're describing, Captain, that woman is dead. She has been dead for 4 years. I was at the memorial. I helped carry the casket, so I need you to understand how serious I am when I tell you that you are either mistaken or something is very, very wrong." Cole sat down slowly in his chair. "She's not dead," he said. "I stood 2 feet from her. I heard her voice. My master sergeant talked to her. Whole command staff saw her. A SEAL chief shook her hand. She was as alive as I am. Whoever you buried 4 years ago, sir, it wasn't her because she was on my base 6 days ago and she saved 12 of my men." The line was quiet, and when the voice came back, it was lower, and there was something in it that Cole had not heard from anyone in this whole strange affair. There was fear. "Then I'm going to have to come see you," the voice said, "in person. Because if what you're saying is true, then a lot of people who thought they were safe are about to find out they're not. Say nothing to anyone. Pull that file offline. And do not under any circumstances mention her name on any channel that isn't secure. I'll be there tomorrow." The line went dead. Cole sat with the phone in his hand for a long time. The man who came the next day was older than his voice had sounded, with gray hair, cut close, and a face that had spent decades learning to give nothing away. He didn't give a name, and Cole didn't ask for one. He came alone in civilian clothes with a single locked case, and he asked to speak with Cole and Coleman, and no one else in a room with no windows and no recording devices. And once the door was closed and the 3 of them were alone, the old man set his case on the table and looked at the 2 soldiers for a long moment before he spoke. "What I'm about to tell you," he said, "is going to stay in this room. Not because I'm ordering you to keep it secret, though I am. Because once you understand what she is, you'll want to keep it secret too, for her sake. Do you understand?" Cole and Coleman nodded. The old man opened the case. He took out a photograph and slid it across the table. It was a younger woman in uniform with an expression that Cole recognized instantly, even though the face was younger and the eyes were less tired. It was her. It was Ava. "Her name," the old man said, "the real one. I'm not going to tell you because it's safer for everyone if it dies with the people who already know it. But she was real. She was one of ours. She came out of a program that officially doesn't exist, that has never existed, that will deny existing if either of you ever breathe a word about it. We took people, a very small number of people, who had a certain rare combination of traits: the stillness, the patience, the ability to go to a cold place inside themselves and do the work and come back. And we made them into something the world isn't supposed to know is possible. Single operators sent alone into places where a whole team couldn't go to do things that changed outcomes without anyone ever knowing a hand had touched them. Coleman let out a slow breath. So she's a legend, a real one. She was the best we ever made, the old man said simply. Not one of the best best. In 15 years, she went into more impossible places and came out of more of them than anyone in the program's history. The valley your men were trapped in the ambush, she broke the 25 fighters she put down in under 2 hours. He shook his head. For most operators, that would be the mission of a lifetime. For her, it was a Tuesday. That was who she was. That was what she could do. Then why is she supposed to be dead? Cole asked. And the old man's face changed. The professional blankness cracked just slightly, and underneath it, Cole saw something that looked like grief and guilt in a very old anger. Because 4 years ago, the old man said, we betrayed her. The room was silent. There was an operation, the old man said slowly, choosing his words with care. A hard one. She was sent in alone, the way she always was, to do something that needed doing. And partway through, the people above me, the people who make the decisions I only carry out, they decided that the operation had become inconvenient, that it was better, cleaner for everyone involved if it had never happened. And the simplest way to make an operation have never happened is to make sure the operator never comes home. Cole felt something cold and sick settle in his stomach. You're saying they tried to kill her? Your own people, after she did what you asked. I'm saying the extraction that was supposed to bring her home was never sent. I'm saying the support she was promised evaporated the moment she was deep enough that she couldn't get out on her own. I'm saying she was left in a place where she was supposed to die quietly and become a problem that solved itself. The old man's jaw tightened. And then when she didn't die, when she somehow fought her way out of a situation that no one was supposed to survive, they declared her dead anyway. Held a funeral, buried an empty casket, closed her file, because a dead operator can't tell anyone what was done to her and can't come looking for the people who did it. On paper, she died a hero 4 years ago. In reality, she walked out of a grave that her own country dug for her, and she disappeared, and until 6 days ago, I believed she was gone for good. Coleman had gone very still. And you were part of it, he said quietly. It wasn't quite an accusation, but it wasn't quite not one either. The old man met his eyes and didn't look away. I was the one who was supposed to send the extraction, he said. And I was told to stand down. And I did. I told myself I had no choice, that the order came from too high, that fighting it would only get me removed and someone worse put in my place. I told myself a lot of things over 4 years. He looked down at the photograph on the table. But the truth is, I let them leave the best person I ever worked with to die alone in a place she went because we asked her to. And I've carried that every day since. So when you called me yesterday and said her name, Captain, and told me she was alive, his voice caught just slightly. You have no idea what that did to me. Part of me was terrified, and part of me, God help me, was glad, because it meant maybe I hadn't killed her after all. Cole sat back in his chair, trying to absorb it, trying to fit it together with the quiet woman who drunk cold coffee in the back of his tent. So all this time, he said slowly, the fake file, the manufactured past, the logistics contractor hiding in plain sight on forward operating bases. That's not someone hiding from an enemy. That's someone hiding from us, from her own people, the ones who tried to have her killed. Yes, the old man said. Then why is she still doing it? Coleman asked. Why is she still out here, still on our bases, still close to the fight? If she wanted to disappear, she could vanish completely. Go somewhere with no soldiers, no operations, no risk of being recognized. Live quiet. But she doesn't. She keeps putting herself right next to the exact kind of work that could expose her. Right next to men who might trap her, might blow her cover, might be the death of her. Why? And the old man was quiet for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice was very soft. Because she can't stop being what she is, he said. You don't understand. A person like that, they don't do the work for the mission or the flag or even the people who send them. Somewhere along the way, it becomes something deeper than that. She does it because she cannot stand by and watch people die when she has the power to stop it. It's not a job to her. It's not even a duty. It's who she is all the way to the bottom. They took everything from her, her name, her past, her country, her right to exist. But they couldn't take that. The one thing that's truly hers is that when everything falls apart and someone is about to die, she steps out of the dark and she saves them. He looked at Cole. That's why she was on your base, Captain. Not because she was hiding there, because that's where the people who need saving are. She stays close to the fight because that's the only part of herself they couldn't kill. The three men sat with that in silence for a while. So what happens now? Cole finally asked. You know she's alive. That means the people who wanted her dead can find out too. Are they going to come looking? The old man's face hardened again. That's the danger. The people who did this to her, most of them are still in place, still powerful. And if word gets to them that she's not only alive but active, that she surfaced to break an ambush that killed the commander of an organization we've been quietly worried about for years. He shook his head. She just did something visible, the most visible thing she's done in 4 years. And visibility for her is the one thing that gets her killed. The men who buried her once would very much prefer she stay buried. Then we don't tell them, Coleman said flatly. Simple as that. Whatever report we write stays vague. Nobody upstream ever connects the incident to her. She stays dead on paper. She stays safe. That was my hope too, the old man said. But it may already be too late, because you weren't the only one asking questions, Captain. Cole frowned. What do you mean? The old man reached into his case again and took out a second sheet of paper. And this one he didn't slide across the table gently. He set it down hard. 3 days ago, he said, before you ever called me, someone else ran a query on the same identifiers you did, from outside the normal channels. Someone with very sophisticated access who knew exactly what to look for. They didn't stumble onto her file the way you did. They went straight for it. They knew her operational identifiers, the ones only a handful of people in the entire program ever had. And they were checking to see if those identifiers had shown any activity. He looked up. They have now. Your incident lit her up like a beacon. Whoever ran that query 3 days ago was looking to see if she was alive. And 6 days ago on your base, she gave them their answer. The blood drained out of Cole's face. You're saying someone already knows. I'm saying someone was already looking, which means someone already suspected, which means the thing I was afraid of, the thing that could get her killed, may already be in motion. The old man's voice was grim. And here's what frightens me most, Captain. The query 3 days ago didn't come from the enemy she made in that valley. It came from inside, from access that only our own people have, which means the ones hunting her now aren't the organization whose commander she killed. It's the same people who tried to bury her 4 years ago. They know she's back. And this time they're not going to make the mistake of assuming she'll die quietly on her own. And in the silence that followed, all three men understood the true shape of what they were caught up in. It was no longer a story about a ghost who saved 12 men. It was a story about a woman her own country had tried to murder, who had refused to die, who could not stop saving people, even though every rescue put her back in the crosshairs, and who was now being hunted by the very men who'd betrayed her men with resources and reach, and every reason to make sure that this time the job got finished. We have to warn her, Cole said. We have to find her and warn her that they know she's alive. The old man laughed softly without any humor in it at all. Captain, he said, you don't find her? Nobody finds her. That's the whole point of what she is. If she wanted you to find her, you already would have. The best we can hope for is that she finds out on her own the way she finds out everything before they get to her. He paused. Although what? The old man was looking at something across the room, and Cole followed his gaze and realized he was looking at the small metal object sitting on the corner of the table where Coleman had set it down. The coin, Harlan's coin, the one she'd taken and then left behind on the bare mattress. She gave that back, the old man said slowly. You told me that. She took the SEAL's coin and then she left it behind when she vanished. That's right, Coleman said. She said she doesn't belong to any team. The old man stood up and walked over to the coin, and he picked it up and he turned it over in his fingers the way Cole had that first morning, and something moved across his weathered face. "No," he said quietly, "that's not why she left it." "Then why?" The old man set the coin down again gently, and he looked at the two soldiers, and there was something in his eyes now that was almost like hope and almost like dread, and Cole couldn't tell which. "Because leaving something behind is how she says goodbye," the old man said. "In 15 years, I watched her walk away from 100 places, and she never once left a trace. Never. Not a fingerprint, not a hair, not a whisper. Leaving nothing behind was the discipline that kept her alive. So if she left this coin, if she deliberately placed it where you'd find it, then she did it on purpose. She wanted you to have it. She wanted you to remember." He paused. "And a person who suddenly starts wanting to be remembered after 15 years of making sure she never was is a person who's decided something. A person who thinks this might be the last time." The room went cold. "You think she knows," Cole said. "You think she already knows they're coming for her." "I think," that the old man said, "that she has always known this day would come. I think she's known for 4 years that eventually her own people would find out she survived, and that when they did, they'd come to finish what they started. And I think that 6 days ago, when a SEAL team was trapped in a valley and she had a choice between staying invisible and saving them, she made a decision. She decided that if surfacing meant they'd finally find her, if saving those men meant painting a target on her own back that would never come off, then so be it. She decided that 12 lives were worth her own." He looked down at the coin. "She left this behind because she was saying goodbye, not to the SEAL, to all of it, to the running and the hiding and the endless staying alive. I think she's tired, gentlemen. I think she's been tired for 4 years. And I think she just decided that if she has to be found, she'd rather be found having done one last good thing." Cole stared at the coin on the table, and he thought about the quiet woman with the cold coffee and the grief in her eyes when she took the coin, and the way she'd said, "Please let me be the ghost." And he understood finally that he'd witnessed something he'd completely misread. He'd thought he was watching a professional protect her cover. He'd actually been watching a woman lay down her life slowly, deliberately, one act of mercy at a time. "Then we can't just let it happen," Cole said, and his voice was rough. "I don't care if she's decided she's tired. I don't care if she thinks 12 lives were worth hers. She saved my men. She's been betrayed enough. I'm not going to stand here and let the same people who tried to murder her 4 years ago get another shot at it. There has to be something we can do." The old man looked at him for a long moment, and something in his weathered face shifted. Softened, warmed by a fraction. "You know," he said quietly, "in 4 years, you're the first person who said that, the first person who heard what was done to her and wanted to fight it instead of look away. I looked away. Better men than me looked away." He picked up his case. "Maybe that's worth something. Maybe that's worth trying." "Trying what?" Coleman asked. The old man moved toward the door, and he paused with his hand on the handle, and he looked back at the two of them. "I spent 4 years of believing I helped kill the best person I ever knew," he said. "And yesterday I found out I was wrong, that she's alive, that she's been out there all this time doing the only thing she knows how to do, which is save people who can't save themselves. I'm an old man. I don't have much left to lose, but I have some access, and I have some old debts I can still call in, and I know how these people think because I used to be one of them." His jaw set. "They're going to come for her. I can't stop that. But maybe, just maybe, I can find out when and where and get to her first. Maybe I can give her the one thing nobody gave her 4 years ago." He opened the door. "A warning and a choice. And if you find her," Cole said, "if you actually reach her before they do, what do you say to the woman you helped leave for dead?" The old man stood in the doorway, and for a moment, the professional mask fell away completely, and Cole saw underneath it a tired old man carrying 4 years of a weight that had nearly broken him. "I say I'm sorry," he said quietly. "And I say it's not too late. And I say that this time, whatever happens, she won't be alone. This time somebody's coming for her." He paused. "It's the least I owe her. It's the least any of us owe her. And it's 4 years too late." And then he was gone out the door and down the hall, an old man moving with sudden purpose, after 4 years of carrying his guilt in silence off to try to save the life of the woman he'd once helped condemn. And Cole and Coleman stood alone in the windowless room with a coin on the table and the terrible knowledge of what they'd stumbled into, And somewhere out beyond the wire and country, no one was watching. The woman who had decided she was tired of running moved quietly through the world, carrying the weight of one last goodbye, not yet knowing that for the first time in 4 years, someone was finally coming to help. It took the old man 9 days to find her, and when he did, it was not because his access worked or his old debts paid off. It was because she let him. He had spent those 9 days pulling every thread he could reach, calling in favors from men who owed him and men who feared him, tracing the query that had lit her up from the inside, working backward toward the people who'd run it. And the more he learned, the worse it got, because the ones hunting her weren't just a few embarrassed officials anymore. It had grown. The organization whose commander she'd killed in that valley had put a price on the ghost who dismantled them. An enormous price. And word of that price had traveled. And somewhere along the way, it had reached the same people inside who'd tried to bury her 4 years ago. And those people had realized that they now had a perfect opportunity. If the outside organization killed her hunting for revenge, then the men who'd betrayed her would finally be safe and their hands would be clean. All they had to do was point the hunters in the right direction. So they had. The old man discovered on the 7th day that someone inside had quietly leaked her operational pattern, the small tells that a person like her could never fully erase, to the very organization that wanted her dead. 2 enemies who should never have been on the same side had been joined together for the single purpose of erasing one tired woman. And they were close. The old man could feel how close, and he was running out of time. On the 9th day, exhausted and half out of hope, he stopped in a small town at the edge of nowhere to rest, and when he walked into the room he'd rented, she was sitting in the chair by the window, waiting for him, as calm as if she'd been there all along. He froze in the doorway. "You look older," Ava said quietly. 4 years older than the last time I saw your face, which was the day you sent me in and didn't send anyone to bring me back." The old man's mouth worked, but for a moment nothing came out. He'd rehearsed this 100 times over 9 days, everything he wanted to say, and now that she was in front of him alive, real, watching him with those still eyes, he remembered all of it left him. "How long have you known I was looking for you?" he finally managed. "Since the 2nd day." She didn't move from the chair. "You're gooder you used to be, but I've been staying alive for 4 years by knowing when someone's pulling threads with my name on the end of them. I felt it the moment you started." She tilted her head slightly. "The question isn't how I knew you were looking. The question is why I let you find me. Because I could have let you chase me forever and you'd never have caught me." "Then why?" "Because I wanted to look at your face," Ava said, "when you told me you were sorry. I wanted to see if you meant it. That's all. I've been alone with what you people did to me for 4 years, and I found out I wanted just once to watch one of you say it and mean it. Is that strange? After everything, that's the thing I wanted." And the old man crossed the room and he sat down heavily in the chair across from her, and he looked at the best person he'd ever known, the one he'd helped leave for dead, and he said the words he'd carried for 4 years. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice broke on it. "I was told to stand down and I stood down. I let them leave you. I told myself I had no choice, and it was a lie. I had a choice. I always had a choice, and I chose to save myself instead of you. And I have hated myself every single day since. There is nothing I can say that makes it right. There's no apology big enough. But it's the truest thing I've ever said, and I need you to hear it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Ava looked at him for a long time. And whatever she saw in his face, it was enough, because slowly something in her shoulders loosened, some weight she'd been carrying set down at last. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, I believe you." She let out a breath. "You have no idea how long I've waited to believe one of you." "There's more," the old man said, urgently leaning forward. "Ava, listen to me. I didn't come just to apologize. I came to warn you. They know you're alive. The incident in the valley lit up your identifiers, and someone inside caught it, and it's worse than that. It's so much worse. The organization whose commander you killed, they put a price on you, an enormous one, and the same people who tried to bury you 4 years ago, they've leaked your patterns to that organization. They've pointed them right at you. 2 enemies working together, one for revenge and one to finish what they started. And they're close, Ava. They're very close. I've been racing to reach you first, and I don't think I've won by much." Ava was quiet. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look afraid. She just nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they hear something they'd already known in their bones. I know, she said. You know, I've felt them for 6 days. Two groups moving toward the same point, which is wherever I am. I've watched them get closer. She looked out the window. That's the other reason I let you find me. I wanted you to have your chance to say it before they got here. Because they're going to be here soon. Tonight, probably. I've been leading them to the edge of this town for 2 days and I stopped running yesterday. The old man went cold. You stopped running? Ava, what does that mean, you stopped running? It means I'm tired, she said simply. And there was no self-pity in it, just fact. It means I've been running for 4 years and I'm tired all the way to the bottom of myself and I've decided I'm done. Not done living, done running. She turned back to him. But don't mistake me. Tired isn't the same as beaten. I didn't stop running so they could catch me. I stopped running so I could choose the ground. The old man stared at her. You're going to fight them, both groups, together, here. I'm going to end it, Ava said. One way or the other. 4 years of looking over my shoulder, 4 years of no name, and no home, and no one it ends tonight. Either they finish what your people started, or I finish it, but it ends. I'm not carrying it into a 5th year. I won't. She stood up from the chair, and there was something in the way she moved, the old readiness coming back into her body, the cold place opening up behind her eyes. You should go. You said what you came to say. You don't need to be here for the rest. No, the old man said, and he surprised himself with how fast it came out, how certain. No, I'm not leaving. This isn't your fight. It's exactly my fight, he said, and he stood up too, an old man who hadn't held a weapon in years, straightening his back. 4 years ago, I stood down when I should have stood up, and it cost you everything. I am not standing down again. I don't care that I'm old and slow and half useless. I am not walking out that door and leaving you alone a second time. If they come for both of us. That's the least I owe you. That's the only way I can begin to make it right. Ava looked at him, and something moved across her face, something she hadn't let herself feel in 4 years, which was the strange warmth of not being completely alone. You'll get yourself killed, she said quietly. Then I'll die doing the thing I should have done 4 years ago, he said. There are worse ways to go. And she almost smiled. Almost. But there was more coming than either of them knew. Because as the light failed outside, it was not only the hunters who were converging on that small town at the edge of nowhere. 200 miles away, Chief Jake Harlan had spent 9 days unable to shake the memory of a soaked woman refusing his coin, and on the 9th day a call had come to him through the same quiet channels that soldiers use to protect their own. Word had reached the SEAL community, the real one, the one that operated below the surface, that the ghost who'd saved 12 men was being hunted and that she was going to be hunted alone. Harlan had not hesitated for even 1 second. He'd made calls of his own to Diaz, who had a 3-year-old daughter who'd see her father again because of a woman named Ava, to the 10 other men who'd walked out of that valley alive. And every one of them had said the same thing Harlan said, which was that a person did not save your life and then get left to die alone while you sat home safe. It wasn't done, not among people like them. So 12 men who owed everything to a stranger had quietly gathered themselves and their gear and started moving toward a small town they'd learned about through Cole, who had learned about it from the old man's frantic final call before he'd gone dark chasing her. They were coming. They just weren't there yet. And the question of the whole long night was whether they would arrive in time or whether they would arrive to find it already finished. The hunters came at full dark. They came the way professionals come, quiet, and coordinated the outside organization's fighters and the inside operators moving in a loose ring toward the building where their prey had gone still. They had numbers. They had planning. They had the confidence of hunters closing on wounded game. What they did not have, what they could not have known, was that the woman they were hunting had chosen this ground, had studied it for 2 days, had turned an ordinary building at the edge of an ordinary town into something built entirely around her. And so the last night of the hunt for Ava Mercer became something the hunters would not have believed if they'd been told it in advance. She let the first ones get close. She always did. And then from a position none of them had thought to cover, the flat crack came out of the dark, and the lead hunter dropped, and the whole careful assault froze in the sudden understanding that the prey was not cornered at all. The prey was waiting. What followed the old man watched from a place of relative safety, where Ava had put him, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to describe it and never manage. Because he had known 4 years ago that she was the best they'd ever made. He'd said it to Cole. But knowing it and watching it were two different things. And he had never actually watched her work, and now he did, and it undid every idea he'd ever had about what a single human being could do. She was everywhere and nowhere. The hunters would concentrate on a position, and she'd already be gone. Already firing from somewhere else, already dropping another of them. Hey, oh no. They tried to flood the building, and she funneled them into places where they could only come one at a time, and she took them one at a time. They tried to pull back and regroup, and she didn't let them. She pressed, she moved. She stayed inside their decision cycle so completely that they were always reacting to what she'd already done. It was not a fight, it was a dismantling. The same cold, precise dismantling she'd visited on the valley, except that this time she was fighting for her own life, and it made her, if anything, worse. My God, the old man breathed, watching. My God, what did we throw away? What did we throw away? But numbers were numbers, and there were a great many of them, and even the best person they'd ever made was still only one person, and slowly, so slowly, the sheer weight of the hunters began to tell. She took a round through the shoulder and kept fighting. She took another through the leg and kept fighting. And the old man, watching her slow, watching her bleed, understood with a rising horror that she had known this was the likely end when she chose to stop running. That she had decided 4 years of exhaustion was enough. And this was where she would set it down, and that she was going to take as many of them with her as she could, and then she was going to die on ground of her own choosing, and she was at peace with it. No, the old man said. No, no, no. He came out of his safe place. He was old and slow, and he had not fired a weapon in years, but he came out anyway, and he picked up a weapon from a fallen hunter, and he stood between Ava and the one still coming, and he fired badly, wildly. But he fired, and he bought her 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, he did the one thing he'd failed to do 4 years ago. He did not stand down. He stood up, and a hunter's round found him, and he went down, and Ava screamed something wordless and terrible, and dragged herself to him. You old fool, she said, holding him, blood on both of them now, hers and his. You old fool, why did you do that? Because, the old man said, and he was smiling, actually smiling through the blood. This time I got it right. 4 years too late, but I got it right. His hand found hers and gripped it. You're not alone, Ava. You hear me, whatever happens. This time you're not alone. I made sure of it. What did you do? She whispered. And that was the moment the night split open with the sound of other men arriving. Many of them fast and hard and lethal, the sound of a fight suddenly turning, because a force of shooters who knew exactly what they were doing had just hit the hunters from behind. Jake Harlan had made it in time. Him and Diaz and 10 others. 12 SEALs who owed her their lives, 12 men who had refused to let her die alone, and they came out of the dark the way she had once come out of the dark for them, and they fell on the hunters with a fury that 4 years of the enemy's planning could never have accounted for. The hunters had prepared to corner one exhausted woman. They had not prepared for the brotherhood she had saved to come collect the debt. It did not take long after that. The hunters caught between the ghost in front of them and the SEALs behind them broke and died, and the ones who could ran the way the last ones always ran into a dark that no longer belonged to them. And when it was over, when the last shot had rolled away into silence, Jake Harlan came across the wreckage of that place and found her sitting on the ground bleeding from 3 wounds, holding a dying old man in her arms. And he dropped down beside her and started working on the old man's wounds and shouting for Diaz to bring the medical kit. You came, Ava said. She sounded stunned. She sounded like a person hearing a language she'd forgotten existed. You came for me. How did you even, why would you? You saved 12 men, Harlan said, working fast, not looking up. You think we were going to sit home while somebody hunted you down? You don't know us very well, Ava. Nobody who saves my whole team dies alone on my watch. Nobody. He glanced at her, at the wounds, at the exhaustion carved into her face. You're going to be okay. You hear me? All 3 wounds, they're bad, but they're not going to kill you, not with us here. And him, he nodded at the old man. He's holding on. Diaz is good with this. We got you, both of you. We got you. The old man's eyes found Ava's, and he was still smiling, weak now, but smiling. See, he whispered. Not alone, told you. And Ava Mercer, who had not cried in 4 years, who had gone to the cold place inside herself so many times that she'd wondered if she still could felt something break open in her chest, and she put her forehead down against the old man's, and she wept there on the ground in the arms of the brotherhood that had come for her. And it was not weakness, it was the thawing of 4 years of being alone. They both lived. It was a near thing for the old man closer than anyone liked, but Diaz was good, and the others got them out, and there were people in that quiet network of soldiers who protected their own, who made sure the right care reached the right places with no names in any file. And when the outside organization's price and the inside men's betrayal were quietly turned over in the weeks after to people, the old man still knew who could do something about it. The hunt for Ava Mercer ended not because she disappeared, but because the ones hunting her found themselves one by one exposed. The old man had been keeping records for 4 years. He had a great deal to say, and this time someone listened. Ava did not disappear again. That was the thing that surprised everyone in the end, most of all her. Because for 4 years she had believed that the only way to survive was to be no one, to belong to nothing, to leave nothing behind. She had refused Harlan's coin because she didn't belong to any team. She had said it plainly that morning at Ridgepoint, standing soaked in the gray light, "I don't belong to any team, I never have." But she'd been wrong, she just hadn't known it yet. Because a team is not the thing that gives you a coin. A team is the 12 men who come out of the dark to die beside you when the whole world has written you off. A team is the old man who finally stands up. A team is the people who refuse to let you be alone even when you've spent 4 years convinced that alone is all you get. And she had one now, whether she'd meant to or not, whether she belonged on paper or not, and it turned out that the thing they tried to take from her, the name, the home, the country, the right to exist, had been replaced by something they could never have given her in the first place. People who knew what she'd done and loved her for it. Months later, when she had healed, when the old man had healed, Jake Harlan found her one more time and he held out the coin again. The same coin, the Seal Legacy coin she'd taken and left behind on a bare mattress. "Last time you gave it back," he said. "I'm giving it to you again. And this time I don't want it back." And Ava Mercer looked at the coin and she thought about the woman who'd refused it, the woman who'd said she didn't belong anywhere, the ghost who left nothing behind. And she understood that she wasn't that woman anymore. That woman had died on the ground in a small town at the edge of nowhere, and someone new had gotten up, someone who had a team, someone who was tired of being alone and had finally decided to stop. She took the coin, and this time she kept it. No medals were ever given. No report ever fully explained what happened in the valley or in the small town or in the 4 years between. No official record confirms that a woman named Ava Mercer ever existed, and to this day, if you pull the file, it will tell you she died a hero 4 years before she saved 12 men from a jungle valley. On paper, she is a ghost. On paper, she was never there at all. But every man who walked out of that valley knows the truth. Every man who came out of the dark to save the woman who had saved them knows it. And an old man who finally stood up when it counted knows it best of all. When everything collapsed, when command failed, when the people who should have protected her tried to bury her instead, when hope was gone, and she had every reason in the world to stay invisible and let others die, a silent woman stepped out of the storm. And she did not disappear this time. This time she came home. Home was a strange word for a woman who hadn't had one in 4 years, and Ava Mercer spent the first weeks after that night in the small town learning how to sit still inside it without feeling like the walls were about to be breached. It was Diaz who gave her the place, or rather Diaz's grandmother, who had a small house on a piece of land far from any base, far from any operation, far from anywhere a hunter would think to look. The old woman had raised Diaz after his own parents were gone, and when Diaz brought this quiet, wounded stranger to her door and said, "Abuela, this is the woman who kept me alive. This is the reason I came home to you." The old woman had looked at Ava for a long moment with eyes that had seen a great deal of the world, and then she'd simply opened the door wider and said, "Then this is your home too, for as long as you need it." And she'd meant it. And Ava, who had forgotten that people could mean a thing like that, had not known what to do with it. For the first 2 weeks, she barely slept. Old habits didn't die because a war ended. She still woke at every sound, still mapped every room for exits, still sat with her back to walls and her eyes on doors. Diaz's grandmother noticed, of course, because there was very little that old woman didn't notice, and she never once said anything about it. She just started leaving a light on in the hallway at night, a small, warm light, so that when Ava jolted awake in the dark, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, the first thing she saw was that light steady in gold and telling her without words that she was safe. It was such a small thing. It undid Ava more than any battle ever had. The old man came to visit when he was strong enough to travel, which took longer than anyone liked because the round he'd taken standing between Ava and the hunters had done real damage, and he was not a young man to begin with. But he came. He arrived one afternoon leaning on a cane, moving slow, gray and thin, but alive. And when Ava opened the door and saw him standing there, the two of them just looked at each other for a long moment without saying anything, because there wasn't anything that needed saying anymore. Everything had been said on the ground that night in blood. "You look better," she told him. "I look terrible," he said, "but I'm vertical, which the doctors tell me is a small miracle." He studied her face. "You look better too. You're sleeping." "Some," she admitted. "Not much, but some." Some is a start. They sat on the porch that afternoon, the old man and the woman he'd once helped leave for dead, and they talked slowly the way people talk when they have 4 years of silence to fill and no hurry to fill it. He told her what had come of his records, the 4 years of quiet documentation he'd kept out of guilt, never knowing he'd one day use it to save her instead of just to torment himself. He told her that the men who tried to bury her, the ones who'd leaked her patterns to the enemy, were being dealt with not loudly, not publicly, but thoroughly by people who had been horrified to learn what had been done in their name. He told her that as far as the world was concerned, she was still dead, still a hero buried 4 years ago, and that this was for once a protection rather than a wound, because a dead woman couldn't be hunted, and a dead woman couldn't be called to testify, and a dead woman could simply be left alone to live. "So it's over," Ava said. "Really over." "It's over," the old man said. "For the first time in 4 years, nobody is looking for you. Nobody is coming. You can put it down, Ava. All of it. You've earned the right to put it down." She was quiet for a while, looking out at the land, at the light going long and gold across it. "I don't know how," she said finally. "That's the thing nobody tells you. I've spent my whole life being the one who steps out of the dark when everything falls apart. I don't know who I am when nothing's falling apart. I don't know how to just be. To wake up and have a day that's only a day. To not be waiting for the next valley." She looked at him. "You spend 15 years becoming the weapon, and then someone tells you the war's over and you can go home. And you realize you don't know what a home is. You don't know what your hands are for when they're not doing that." The old man nodded slowly. He'd known men who came back from the cold place and never learned how to leave it. Men who lived out their years, still fighting a war that had ended decades before, and it had always broken his heart. "You learn," he said gently. "That's all I can tell you. You learn the way you learned everything else, slow and badly at first, and then a little better. You let people like that grandmother in there leave a light on for you. You let those SEALs call you every week to check in, which I understand they do whether you answer or not. You let an old man come sit on your porch and bore you with his stories. And one day you wake up and you realize you had a whole day that was only a day. And it didn't feel like waiting, it felt like living. And then you have another, and another. That's how it happens. Not all at once. One ordinary day at a time." Ava was quiet for a long moment. "You sound like you know," she said. "I've spent 4 years learning to live with what I did," the old man said. "It's not the same as what you're carrying, but it's not so different either. We're both learning how to be human again after a long time being something else. Maybe we can learn it in the same direction if you'll have an old fool for company now and then." And Ava, to her own surprise, found that she wanted that. She wanted the old man's visits. She wanted the porch and the light in the hallway and the weekly calls from 12 men who wouldn't let her disappear. She wanted for the first time and longer than she could remember to stay. The calls were real. That was the part that took her longest to believe. Every week without fail, one of them would call, rotating through the team, so it was never the same voice twice in a row, so that over the course of a month, she heard from all of them. Diaz checking in with news of his daughter, who had started calling Ava Tia over the phone, though they'd never met, because Diaz had told her about the woman who saved her daddy, and the little girl had decided that made Ava family. Harlan gruff and steady, never saying much, just calling to hear her voice and confirm she was still there, still safe, still alive. The others, one by one, men she'd never really spoken to on that terrible night. Men she'd known only as shapes moving through her rifle's protection, who now called her friend. At first, she didn't answer. She'd let the phone ring and listen to the voicemails afterward alone in the dark, the way she'd always done everything at a distance, protected. But there was one call, 3 months in, that changed it. It was Diaz. And when the voicemail played, it wasn't Diaz's voice at all. It was a small voice, a child's voice, careful and shy, clearly holding the phone the way a 3-year-old holds a phone too close and slightly wrong. Tia Ava, the little voice said. Papa says you keep people safe. Papa says you kept him safe so he could come home to me. I wanted to say thank you, and I made you a picture. Papa is going to send it. It's you. You have a cape because Papa says you're a hero. Okay, bye, I love you. Ava sat in the dark and listened to that voicemail 7 times. And the next week when the phone rang, she answered it. The picture arrived a few days later, folded into an envelope with no return address, forwarded through the quiet network that protected them all. It was exactly what the little girl had described. A stick figure with long hair and a triangle for a body standing under a lopsided crayon sun, wearing a cape that was mostly red and slightly outside the line. Underneath, in the shaky letters of a child just learning to write with help from her father, where the harder words got too big, it said, "For Tia Ava, you kept my papa safe, thank you." Ava put it on the refrigerator in Diaz's grandmother's kitchen, held there with a magnet shaped like a lemon, and every morning when she came down for coffee, it was the first thing she saw. A child's drawing of a woman with a cape. It did something to her that 4 years of surviving had not been able to do. It made her feel for the first time that the cost of surfacing in that valley, the target on her back, the near death in that small town, all of it had bought something real. A little girl had her father, and the little girl knew Ava's name and put a cape on her and loved her sight unseen for keeping her papa safe. That was worth a life. That was worth all of it. The seasons turn the way they do, even for people who've forgotten how to notice, and Ava Mercer began slowly, badly, and then a little better to build the things she'd never had. She learned the land around Diaz's grandmother's house. She learned to fix things, small things, a fence, a leaking pipe, a door that stuck, and she found that there was a quiet satisfaction in using her hands to build and mend instead of the other things she'd used them for all her life. She learned the old woman's recipes standing in the warm kitchen in the evenings, while Diaz's grandmother directed her with the absolute confidence of someone who had fed people for 70 years. She learned to sit on the porch in the evening and watch the light go long and not feel like she was waiting for anything at all. She still didn't sleep well. Some things don't heal all the way, and she knew they never would, and she made her peace with that. There would always be a part of her that lived in the cold place that mapped exits and watched doors that came awake at every sound. But the light in the hallway stayed on, and the phone rang every week, and the child's drawing stayed on the refrigerator, and slowly the space around the wounded part of her filled up with things that were warm and ordinary and real, until the wound was just one part of her instead of the whole of her. The old man came for a longer visit as the year turned cold, and one evening on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill, he said something that stayed with her. "You know what the cruelest thing they did to you was," he said. "It wasn't leaving you to die. It wasn't the 4 years of running. It was making you believe you didn't belong anywhere. That was the real wound. They convinced the best person I ever knew that she was alone, that she had to be alone, that alone was all she'd ever get. And you believed it because they set it up so you'd have to believe it to survive." He looked at her. "But it was a lie, Ava. It was always a lie. You belonged somewhere the whole time. You just hadn't found it yet." "And where's that?" she asked quietly. The old man gestured a small movement of his hand that somehow took in the whole of it. The house behind them with its warm light. The kitchen with the child's drawing on the refrigerator. The phone that rang every week. The 12 men who wouldn't let go. Diaz's grandmother, who had opened her door to a stranger without a second thought. Himself an old man who'd found redemption in standing up when it counted. "Here," he said simply, "you belong here with people who know what you did and love you for it. That's what a home is, Ava. It was never a place. It was always the people who won't let you be alone. And you have those now. You have more of them than most people get in a whole lifetime. You just had to survive long enough to find them." Ava was quiet for a long time, looking out at the dark land and the stars coming out over it. "I spent 4 years," she said finally, "believing I'd die alone in some place with no name and that it wouldn't matter, that there'd be no one to know or care. and I made my peace with that. I decided that was the deal, that was what my life was, and I stopped hoping for anything else. She turned to look at the old man. And then 12 men I barely knew came out of the dark to die beside me. And a little girl put a cape on me and called me family. And an old woman left a light on in the hallway. Her voice caught just slightly. I don't know what I did to deserve any of it. You saved 12 men who were going to die, the old man said. You painted a target on your own back to do it knowing what it would cost. That's what you did to deserve it. But that's not really how it works, Ava. People don't love you because you earned it. That grandmother in there doesn't have a ledger. Those SEALs aren't paying off a debt. They love you because of who you are all the way to the bottom. The thing they couldn't take from you, remember, the thing that made you step out of the storm when you could have stayed safe. That's the thing people love. That's the thing that was always worth loving. You just never let anybody close enough to see it before. And Ava Mercer, the ghost, the weapon, the woman who had been made into something the world wasn't supposed to know was possible, sat on a porch in the cold with an old man wrapped in blankets, and she understood finally all the way through that the war was over. Not just the fighting, the other war, the longer one, the one inside her, the 4-year war against the belief that she was alone and always would be. That war was over too, and she had won it not with a rifle, not from the high ground in the dark, but by the simple, impossible act of letting people in. Spring came, and with it, a visit she hadn't expected. They all came, all 12 of them, plus Diaz's little girl, plus Cole and Coleman, who had started this whole thing by refusing to throw a quiet contractor out of a command tent. They came to Diaz's grandmother's house, filling it past its walls, spilling out onto the land 12 SEALs, and a base commander, and a master sergeant, and a 3-year-old girl, and an old man with a cane, and they came for no reason at all except to be together. To be in the same place as the woman who'd brought them all together to prove with their presence what they'd been proving with every weekly phone call, that she was not alone, that she would never be alone again, that she belonged. The little girl found Ava first. She came running across the yard, this small, serious child who had decided a long time ago over the phone that Ava was hers, and she stopped in front of her and looked up with Diaz's steady eyes, and she said, "Are you Tia Ava with the cape?" And Ava, the woman who had faced down 2 coordinated enemy forces without her heart rate rising, found that her hands were shaking as she knelt down. "I don't have a cape," she said softly. "I'm sorry. I'm not really a hero. I'm just a person." The little girl frowned, considering this with the total seriousness of the very young. "Papa says you're a hero," she said. "Papa doesn't lie. So you have a cape. You just can't see it." She reached out and patted Ava's shoulder twice the way you reassure someone. "It's okay, I can see it. It's red." And Ava Mercer, who had not been broken by war or betrayal or 4 years alone, was completely undone by a 3-year-old with crayons. And she pulled the little girl into her arms and held her. And over the child's shoulder, she looked up at all of them, the 12 men and the 2 officers and the old man and the grandmother in her doorway. All these people who had come out of the dark for her, the way she'd once come out of the dark for them. Harlan crossed the yard and crouched down next to her. "Told you," he said quietly. "That morning at Ridgepoint, you said you didn't belong to any team. And I told you you did. You just didn't know it yet." He put his hand on her shoulder, the same shoulder the little girl had patted. "You know it now." Ava looked around at all of them, at the impossible warm crowd of them, at the child in her arms, and the light in the doorway, and the whole ridiculous, beautiful family that had assembled itself around a woman who had spent 4 years certain she'd die alone and unremembered. "Yeah," she said, and her voice was thick, and she didn't care. "Yeah, Chief, I know it now." That night after the food and the noise, and the little girl finally asleep in Diaz's arms, they built a fire out on the land and sat around it, all of them, and told stories, and laughed and were quiet together, in the way that only people who've been through something can be quiet together. And at one point, Harlan stood up and cleared his throat, and the group went still, and he pulled something from his pocket and held it up in the firelight. It was the coin, the SEAL legacy coin, the one he'd given her twice, once refused and once kept. "I gave this to Ava a while back," Harlan said, "and she kept it, and that meant more to me than she'll ever know. But I've been thinking, a legacy coin is supposed to pass from one warrior to the next. That's the whole point of it. It's not supposed to sit in a drawer. It's supposed to keep moving, keep carrying the story forward." He looked at Ava. "So I've got a request." and you can say no. What is it? Ava said. Harlan crouched down, and he wasn't talking to Ava anymore. He was talking to the small sleeping shape in Diaz's arms, the little girl with the crayons who saw a cape that wasn't there. Someday, Harlan said quietly, when she's old enough to understand, I think it should go to her. From you. So she knows the whole story. So the legacy keeps moving. So 100 years from now, if anybody's still telling it, they know that there was a woman who stepped out of a storm to save 12 men, and that she found her way home, and that she gave her coin to a little girl who could see the cape the rest of us missed. He looked back up at Ava. What do you say? You want to pass it on. When the time comes, you want to be the legacy she carries. And Ava Mercer looked at the coin in the firelight, and at the sleeping child, and at all the faces around the fire, and she thought about the woman she'd been, the ghost, who left nothing behind, who belonged nowhere, who was certain she'd die, unremembered in a place with no name. That woman was gone. She'd died on the ground in a small town, and someone new had gotten up. Someone who had a home and a family, and a little girl who called her Tia, and a coin to pass forward, and a story that would outlive her, now carried by the people she'd saved, and the child who'd see the cape. Yeah, Ava said, and she was smiling now. A real smile, the first fully real one in more years than she could count. Yeah, when the time comes. I'd like that more than anything. She reached out and took the coin from Harlan's hand, and she closed her fingers around it, and she held it the way you hold something you intend to keep and to protect and someday to pass on. The fire burned down slow. The stars wheeled overhead, and a woman who had spent her whole life being the silent protector, who stepped out of the dark and then vanished before anyone could thank her, finally for the first time stayed. She stayed for the fire and the stories and the laughter. She stayed for the weekly phone calls and the light in the hallway and the child's drawing on the refrigerator. She stayed for the old man's visits and the grandmother's recipes and the whole ordinary, impossible life that had grown up around her like flowers coming up through the ruins of everything that had been done to her. She stayed. And that in the end was the bravest thing she ever did. Not the valley, not the 25 targets in the storm, not the last stand in the small town at the edge of nowhere. The bravest thing Ava Mercer ever did was to lay down the weapon of being alone and let herself be loved and stay. No official record will ever confirm that she existed. On paper, she is still a ghost, still a hero buried years before she saved 12 men. The world will never know her name. But a little girl knows it, 12 men know it, an old man who found his redemption knows it, and on a piece of land far from any war in a house with a light always left on in the hallway, a woman who was never supposed to make it home lived out her days surrounded by the family she saved and was never alone again. She found her way home, and she stayed, and that is the truest ending there could ever be.